We have the Athletics' Adam Crafton and also our US correspondent, Paul Tenorio, who has actually, Paul, been with Inter Miami on their preseason tour of Saudi Arabia and also Asia as well. And for that reason, Paul, let's start with you. Let's get an overview of what exactly is going on with Messi and Inter Miami, and why has it caused such a stir out there?
Well, the tour was meant to be this huge commercial opportunity for Inter Miami to capitalize on the fact that Leo Messi is playing in MLS and playing for Inter Miami. And so they designed this tour to go from Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, where they played two friendlies, to Hong Kong for another friendly, and then on to Tokyo, an Asia tour to grow the fan base, reach all these new fans, bring people into the brand, and obviously benefit financially from all of that. And the tour started off not great from a sporting standpoint. They lost both games in Saudi Arabia. The second game, they were smashed 6-0. There was no Ronaldo on the field. Messi played after it was already 6-0. So it wasn't quite the hype that we thought this tour would start off with. But they go to Hong Kong and Messi doesn't play at all. And the fans don't realize that he's not going to play until the final few minutes of the clock are ticking off and they start to chant for a refund and they start to boo. And when the final whistle sounds, I mean, the crowd goes crazy, just so angry, so upset. And in the moment, totally understandable. You bought all these tickets for high prices to see Messi play. Everyone's going to be upset. And I was maybe a little bit surprised that David Beckham got booed, but I understood where the sentiment was coming. But what I don't think anyone anticipated was how much more this incident grew as the tour continued. So Inter Miami leaves Hong Kong, they head to Tokyo, and Messi plays 3 days later. He plays 30 minutes in the game in Tokyo against Vissel Kobe, and that only inflames what happened in Hong Kong from the government standpoint, from the newspapers, the state-run newspapers that are running articles. It's become even more of an insult now that Messi would not play in Hong Kong and would play 30 minutes in Tokyo. And so when you look at the tour in totality, it wasn't great from a sporting perspective, though no one expected it to be. It's preseason, results aren't supposed to matter, but still, you lose a player to an ACL injury in El Salvador. You lose a big, big game against Ronaldo's team on a pretty big platform. You only win one of your games, and it's in Hong Kong, and that's overshadowed by Messi not playing. Not exactly the type of publicity that Inter Miami was hoping for from this tour. Just one preseason game left. They'll play against Newell's old boy, Messi's boyhood club, Tata Martino, the manager, a legend there. But they're going to have to hope that the results are really good this season to kind of overshadow or to kind of balance out the negativity that came from this preseason that was supposed to be this kind of hype building machine.
Yeah, Adam, your pieces just drops on the Athletic on especially, what went on in Hong Kong and the hostile response that Inter Miami and Messi in particular received. Can you just give us a bit more of a glimpse as to why it caused such a ruckus?
Yeah, well, it's a pretty mad story, to be honest. And I suppose it shows, you know, just just the kind of the cost of Messi, the attraction of Messi, the value of Messi, not only to Inter Miami, but to kind of everywhere he goes, right? So when he was going to Riyadh to do what, it was billed as this kind of everything is now billed as the last dance, isn't it? But it was billed as the last dance between Ronaldo and Messi. Didn't really work out like that with Ronaldo being injured. That obviously would have disappointed, I think, Saudi Arabia to a certain extent. But that was kind of nothing in comparison to what happened when they then go to Hong Kong. And, you know, I think most people would just kind of look at what's happened in Hong Kong, where basically a footballer's gone, he's not fully fit, it's pre-season, therefore he can't play, and just think, what the hell is all the fuss about? And I suppose you have to place it in the context of what Hong Kong currently is and has been over the past few years. You've had a city there that has had very severe COVID-19 lockdowns. You've had a situation where there's been pretty vigorous protests over the last few years as well, sort of increased power for Beijing in kind of over the lawmakers of Hong Kong as well. And I think taking all that into account, it's meant that Hong Kong, which I think most people in the West have kind of always thought of as this kind of bursting metropolis
Mm.
in the Far East, and this tourist attraction just isn't what it was, what it used to be anymore. From that perspective, the footfall has not recovered Kind of if you go back to 2018 and compare it to now, I think, last year, 2023 was around sort of 55 to 60% compared to what it was in 2018. So, and then you've had big stars, people like Taylor Swift. There's, a new lesson for sports fans. There is always a Taylor Swift angle. You can get into any piece whatsoever.
I'm waiting for basketball. I'm waiting for basketball.
Yeah,
It's coming.
So Taylor Swift didn't add Hong Kong to her tour dates. She did add Tokyo and Singapore. And I think as a result of that, Hong Kong is starting to try and organize what they're calling them, these mega events, to try and really re-establish the city as a place to go, with a place to be. And as a result of that, you had Hong Kong, the government of Hong Kong, sort of putting money into this, along with Tatler Asia, that were organizing the tour. And then when he didn't play, it was like all hell broke loose. And what I said there about kind of more of a kind of Beijing mentality increasingly coming into Hong Kong, I think it meant that it was perceived, Messi not playing, as a huge slight, as though he was being personally offensive. And you had these really quite staggering editorials going on in kind of state affiliated newspapers, which were saying things like, dark forces from abroad are behind this. You had conspiracies about like CIA involvement. You had conspiracies about Jorge Mas, who's the owner of co-owner of Inter Miami, the fact that his dad was an exile from Cuba and anti-Castro, therefore his son might be anti-Chinese, and therefore Messi might be anti-Chinese as a consequence. And it all kind of snowballed, and it snowballed to the extent that, like, if you go on Messi's Instagram page now and just look at the comments, even under a picture he posted with his family the other day, you will just find like thousands of pictures of Cristiano Ronaldo as memes, kind of trying to undermine him. And then you'll also have, apologize to your fans in Asia, flags of the Chinese flag, stories of people that saved up all this money to go and watch them play. And then I suppose the biggest slight that was perceived was that he then went to play in Tokyo, in Japan, 3 days after not being fit enough to play in Hong Kong. And I think that was almost the tipping point that kind of, I suppose, tipped the whole conversation over the edge. And then since then, you've also had Argentina games, national team games, which were meant to be played in China in March, being cancelled, which is pretty amazing, to be honest. That the sporting authorities in China and Beijing have basically said, we're not doing this for reasons kind of everyone knows, we don't really want Messi here, is the gist of it. So it has really just kind of turned into this diplomatic, geopolitical, cultural moment. And Messi's probably in the middle of it, thinking, all I've done is pulled a groin, right? It's pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, Paul, I was just thinking about that, and I was sort of, Alan just led me to my next question, really. Look, you've got a team, Messi, 36 years old, Suarez, 37, Busquets, 35, Jordi Alba, 34. I mean, these aren't young men. These things do happen in football. It's just such a shame that one of those players in particular is probably one of the biggest stars in global football.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there are a few things that Adam said that really sparked things that I'm experiencing following Inter Miami around both last year when Messi first arrived and through the preseason this year. And the biggest is that you have to learn, and I think even every one of us is learning the degrees, the number of degrees higher Messi is than pretty much anyone else. Like Ronaldo probably would have the same sort of impact, but he is so many levels above Busquets and Alba and even Suarez when it comes to celebrity. And so when I arrived in Hong Kong, it was this huge event. It did feel different than it felt in Riyadh. It did feel different than it felt in Tokyo. Everything felt like it was pointing toward this game. So, for the training session the day before, I tried to take a cab to the stadium. They had to stop a few blocks away, and I had to get out because the streets were blocked off to allow people to walk to the stadium unencumbered. And the streets were filled with people as though it was a game day. I left the stadium that night, 40,000 people for a training session, by the way. And I walked to go get dinner downtown. It was about an hour walk for me. And just so I could see the downtown, I couldn't look anywhere without seeing posters and billboards and signs for this game. And there were 4 or 5 players on those signs, but only one of them was what this game was for, what this event was for. And that became very apparent the next day. And this is something that Miami has already encountered and will continue to encounter, is people are going to be disappointed when they get Inter Miami and they don't get Messi. So I was in Chicago. I live in Chicago. I was at the game at Soldier Field. They sold out Soldier Field, an NFL stadium, highest grossing revenue game in MLS history in terms of ticket prices and tickets sold. And Messi didn't play. He was injured. And so there was this huge event, huge moment, and the Fire did the best they could to capitalize on it. They played well. Shaqiri scored a couple goals. You try to pull some of those fans in, but the fans feel disappointed because they paid jacked up prices to see Messi, not to see Busquets and Alba against Chicago Fire. And the same thing here in Hong Kong, where you have this, you have to weigh these realities, which is that Messi is in fact a human being. His muscles do get inflamed or tear or pull, and he's not able to just play on a whim. And you also have these events that are built around Messi being there and around Messi playing. And so how do you find and strike that balance? And this isn't a new phenomenon. When David Beckham came to Major League Soccer, the same thing happened. He was injured when he arrived with the LA Galaxy. He played that first friendly against Chelsea, but he had an ankle injury and he missed many, many games after that. And people were holding signs in Dallas where they had bought these jacked up prices tickets, and it said, bench it like Beckham and things like that. And so I think Miami's getting a dose of that. And it's difficult, especially I think even more so for an event like this in Hong Kong, because Miami's going back to Chicago this year as part of their regular season schedule. How often are they going to take a flight to Hong Kong and have this huge event and this opportunity where people were buying tickets to fly from mainland China to Hong Kong to see him play and spending all this money to see him play? And so that is, I think, a very difficult dance for Inter Miami to manage. And I wonder whether they I think they had to have not anticipated how big it would be for Messi to not step on the field even for 3 or 4 or 5 minutes to play. But that is the reality when you're dealing with a celebrity, a personality as big as Messi. And I think Inter Miami has learned that in a very harsh way. But it's going to be a part of their reality as long as Messi's on the team. When he doesn't play, people are going to be angry about it.
Yeah, I think there's like 2 or 3 things going on with that particular moment, that game in Hong Kong. You've got, I think, first of all, you have just like pretty ordinary Hong Kong football fans who have paid a hell of a lot of money. You're talking in some cases beyond $500 US dollars for tickets, and they feel ripped off, right? It's like you've gone for a Michelin star dinner and you've ended up with a chip van, and is the way I think that some people see it. No offense to the other Inter Miami players there, but I think that is the way that they've almost seen it, right? You've gone to the Ritz, you've ended up in the Travel Lodge, and as a result of that, you've got that's one level of what's happening. I think another level of it is this kind of just obsession with probably people aged kind of 25 and below, who go to events and they want to produce their own content basically from these moments, right? They want to have that picture that they're taking of Messi on the pitch, a little clip of him doing a trick during the warm-ups of the game or whatever, or being on the pitch that they then put on Snapchat, on Instagram, or memes or blogs or whatever it is. And I think that plays into it a little bit as well. And that's where you have this really performative backlash as well, right? So these kind of viral videos where you have someone flying through the air and decapitating Messi's head in a video that goes viral, and then all of a sudden it's a huge news story. And there was quite a few things like that going on. And then on top of that, you have kind of this feeling of being sort of really slighted and put out and insulted. Sorry, that's a weird thing that my mum's house has. That
I can't hear it.
I don't know if you could hear that. Every time someone walks past the door, this noise goes off.
Right.
So then you have this feeling of kind of this political sort of people being slighted, and I think that's where the Chinese decision, to stop doing these games in March for the Argentina national team has come into it. And that's also where you've had, a lot of people on social media, a lot of Chinese people on social media sort of writing to liquor companies that Messi has partnerships with, saying you need to cut ties with this guy. Like, this guy's insulted China, he's insulted Hong Kong, he doesn't respect us, he's a puppet for the States, all of this sort of stuff. So I think those are the different things going on. And then you also have, on top of that, I think China, if just going off what the kind of the political analysts were saying and academics were saying in this piece, China's relationship with Argentina has also become quite interesting since Argentina have a new president, who is, kind of this self-confessed anarcho-capitalist, who during his campaign trail, it's Javier Milei, isn't it? I pronounce it. Is that pronunciation right?
Yeah.
Javier Milei, who was sort of saying on the campaign trail that the Chinese government are assassins, and he wasn't going to work with communists, and you have this block of the like BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. The Argentines were invited to join. They then decided to withdraw from that when the new president came in, and obviously the Chinese, it's kind of this counterweight to Western powers. And when Argentina don't go into that, it's seen probably in Beijing as a bit of a slight when you add it to the things that the president's saying. And therefore, when a star player not just a player, is it? You think of Argentina, he's the first person who comes into your head, it's Leo Messi. So when that opportunity to kind of undermine Argentina comes along, I don't think it's too conspiratorial to suggest that Beijing may have been, welcoming that opportunity to kind of draw a little bit of a line in the sand. And it's not the first time we've seen this kind of sporting retaliation, which can seem quite petty to the outside world. But there was, a really famous case with the NBA a few years ago where was the Houston Rockets, who was, I think, the general manager, and he was retweeting in support of the protests in Hong Kong, the pro-democracy protests. And as a result of that, the Chinese state TV channel basically just cut off the NBA for like 28 months, apart from sort of a couple of games. And then there was a game where, after Mesut Ozil criticized the treatment of Muslims in China, you had the Arsenal-Manchester City Premier League game that wasn't shown in China. So we have seen this kind of retaliation through sport at different points. And this may be another example of it, or it might just be they woke up and didn't like the fact Messi had gone to Japan, and didn't like the fact he hadn't turned up to the game, felt a bit insulted, maybe overthinking it. But there's all these different conversations, I think, going on.
But Adam, I think it's interesting too to note that Messi provides a massive platform for anyone to capitalize on, whether it's somebody on social media or a politician making a statement or a newspaper writing an editorial. When it's about somebody who is as big as Messi, it can increase the reach of those statements. People listen, people pay attention, and that is the gravity of Leo Messi, and that's why this fallout is so big, and that's why Inter Miami has full store displays in Hong Kong Adidas stores. He is just such a huge figure that this provided. I thought it was really interesting in your story that this moment provided this enormous platform to then utilize kind of in the fallout from him not playing.
Yeah, I think the other thing is, as you say, your experience of being out there was Messi's face was everywhere, right? And I think you can't underestimate how heavily promoted his presence in this game was. And therefore, when we on the outside look at this being like, it was a football match, sometimes people don't play, it was almost promoted as a Messi event, arguably more than Inter Miami. It was almost Beckham and Messi, right? Seemed to be the branding of it to a large extent.
I mean, I would say Beckham even a sideshow to that. It was interesting in the training session, the day before, the whole team came out, and when Busquets came out, there was a smattering of applause. Oh, we know who you are. And Alba the same. And then Suarez came out a bit later, and he got a bit of a bigger applause. And then Messi came out, and the stadium erupted. And yeah, the only person that came close to that level was Beckham, when he was kind of a surprise appearance when Beckham showed up. And it was the same on game day. And that's where, like, for me, the red flag first started was pregame, because the whole team came out, they announced the lineups, and Messi was announced as being on the bench, and the substitutes came out, and Suarez and Messi were not among the substitutes to come out and warm up when Busquets and Alba were. And a few minutes closer to game time, the two emerged from the tunnel, kind of almost like they were trying to, I don't want to say sneak in, but it was definitely after the rest of the teams and the players had come out. And of course, Messi can't sneak in anywhere, right? So he comes out and the fans go crazy. But he was wearing a pink hoodie and black pants and sneakers. And when I saw that he wasn't in boots, and Suarez was, by the way, and he was in uniform, I thought Messi's not going to play. But I was like, how could that be? Because they've announced him as a sub. There's been no indication that he's not going to play. And he went and sat. And I thought, okay, maybe this is like, he is injured. He's only going to play a short amount of time. So he'll go back in and he'll do a full warm up at halftime, get on the bike, whatever he needs. But he came back out again with the sneakers on and the warm up pants and the hoodie. And I said, oh man, he's not playing. And it took another like 25, 30 minutes for the stadium, I think, to realize, he's not getting up. And so to your point, and this was in the article as well, there was no sort of indication to the stadium itself that Messi wasn't going to play. And, it seems like Tatler Asia had no idea until 15 minutes before the game. But the fans didn't have an idea until 65, 70 minutes into the game. And I think that only added to the disappointment.
Yeah, just on that, Paul, I spoke to the chairman of Tatler Asia. I mean, sort of felt a bit sorry for him, this guy who's sort of organized this event and is dealing with fallouts from all different directions. And he was saying, as you said, he only knew sort of a quarter of an hour before the event. He was saying, we felt the event was perfectly organized, except for the fact we didn't really have any visibility about this injury until kind of just before the game started. And then you have this almost like pretty farcical episode he describes where he's spending the first half trying to persuade Inter Miami to get Messi onto the pitch, right? Even though, and it seems absurd to us, right? Like the guy's declared himself injured, even though he's on the subs bench, I suppose. So maybe not to some extent.
And the medical team had declared him unfit to play, according to Tata Martino that morning, that it would be a huge, quote unquote, huge risk for him to play. Right.
So you have this kind of mad scenario playing out where the organizer of the event is basically pleading with Inter Miami, like, get this, you need to get him on the pitch in some way. And then I think there was kind of, and then there was some really like just baffling interviews after the game where you have like a professor of like physical education from a university in Hong Kong, basically saying, look, Messi wasn't on crutches, so he should have been on the pitch, right? And this was kind of like some of the stuff that was going around. And you're like, what is going on? You're a professor of education. And you're telling this guy to go out injured. But then I think there was a few extra slides. So like a trophy presentation at the end of the game. And he was kind of at the back of that. And it was one of those things where I think if Messi was somebody who was more comfortable as an orator, able to speak English and address crowds, which isn't really his personality. It's not criticism, it's just not him. But if he would have been someone that could pick up a microphone and actually, almost at half time say, I'm really happy to be here, really honored, enjoyed training essay. I'm really sorry my body is not up to it, but I love you all. Maybe I'll be back one day in the future. Hugs, kisses, goodbye, right? And I think you might have got away with it. But then when you don't do that, and then when also, I think there's this guy, John Lee, they have a chief executive who leads the government of Hong Kong, which sounds more like a business than a kind of legislature. That's kind of that's the title there. And it looks to people there as though he'd sort of avoided shaking his hand during that presentation by being at the back. So all these things just kind of accumulated. And then you add on to it rocking up to Japan 3 days later and playing, and it just snowballed from there.
Like, I guess in comparison, this is where the PR machine that is Cristiano Ronaldo kind of steps up. He, and it's gone viral, really. Him talking to the Chinese people saying, I can't be with you, I love you. Those classic sort of biblical kind of saint-like, PR triumphs, really, that Ronaldo seems to have actually smashed. I guess, Paul, from a Messi perspective, and he's always been incredibly famous, but going to Inter Miami, it's a different kind of machine in terms of how he's being used. Is this now what Messi has to get used to, being flowing out and being strung out in front of crowds to try and recoup some of this Inter Miami PR, but also MLS PR, let's not forget?
Yeah, and Leo Messi PR too. I mean, he's got stakes in the Asian market as well. I think Adam nailed it in that Messi is a different personality than Ronaldo. We know that for sure. They couldn't be quite more opposite. And he's never been comfortable being a public figure, being in the public eye, being held up as anything. I mean, even in his wonderful Michelob Ultra commercial in the Super Bowl that many people thought was the best
Ted
commercial,
Lasso.
he said three words, no
Mm.
Michelob Ultra, so he's never been comfortable in those moments. And
Mm.
I think that certainly contributed here. I mean, David Beckham after the game took the microphone to do a bit of what Adam was suggesting that Messi could have done, right? He tried to, in a way, kind of fall on the sword or on the microphone to explain, we're so sorry. We hope to be back to entertain you again. And of course, the fans were booing, but Beckham, I think, has over time, he learned to embrace his celebrity, to embrace this kind of side of who he was, the spokesman. And you saw it in action in the moments after the game by taking the microphone, giving that speech, doing a loop around the stadium, waving at each section as he went, and some people were yelling things at him, giving him the finger, letting him know they weren't accepting his apology, but he just kept smiling and going around the field. At one point, a pitch invader ran on and they were going to arrest him, and Beckham went up and said, no, don't arrest him. He gave him a hug. He signed his shirt. And, those are things that I think people like Beckham and Ronaldo, who are more comfortable in those moments, in those environments, know that they can do or should do to try to ease things. And it's just, it's not really who Messi is. And you can see it in kind of when he picks and chooses the moments to do it. He's very discerning, and he's very, I think he understands kind of when he has to do something, versus like in Hong Kong when it would have been a last minute decision. Like, I think he needs to be prepared to go out and say something. So, since he joined Inter Miami as an example, him getting up in Japan and doing a press conference, that was the second time he had ever done a press conference as an Inter Miami player. He had spoken only twice outside of press conferences since becoming an Inter Miami player to the crowd. He spoke when he was introduced in Miami, and he spoke after he won the Ballon d'Or to a stadium that had come to celebrate his Ballon d'Or in Miami. So those moments where he is willing to take the mic and willing to speak to people are few and far between. And I think, the hard part for us is, well, wait a second, you are one of the most famous people in the world. You should be okay taking a microphone and speaking, but it's just not his personality. And I think, there's not a lot of understanding for that, for somebody of his stature to be an introvert and to not want to be in those moments. Well, it's like, well, you don't really have a choice, do you? Because you're in the spotlight. And I think Messi has kind of pushed back on that by just kind of embracing who he is and saying, no, I'm okay just sitting over here on the side or behind the rest of the team during the trophy ceremony, and trying to kind of hide as best I can.
I think there's 2 points with that. One is that, like, that is so not American sports, right?
Exactly.
Like the idea that like access is hugely restricted. I'm not saying it's kind of a nirvana where everyone's always available and things like that, but it is really the sort of the counter to what US sports is kind of praised for in a lot of outside of the continent by a lot of people. You want your stars to be storytellers. You want them to be able to really convey what's going on. You want them to give that sort of glimpse behind the scenes. And really, Messi only talks with his feet, right? And that has carried his career, and that is incredibly a spectacular thing in itself. And people are prepared to pay all that money, both in sponsorship and tickets and all of that kind of thing. But it is an interesting kind of counterweight to what we're used to seeing in the States. And I think that the other thing that strikes me is, Messi, when he came, there's all these conversations about, legacy for MLS and legacy for Inter Miami and the brand of MLS and Inter Miami. And I do increasingly feel, and I'm really interested what Paul thinks about this, as though there is a danger that the brand of both MLS and Inter Miami just becomes Messi, right? And then actually, when Messi's gone, in 2 years' time, does Hong Kong actually want Inter Miami to visit? Because surely that's the point of this whole thing, is to grow the teams, right? To not make it all about kind of individual stars that you get a quick glimpse of, to kind of start to move away from that world where MLS is kind of reliant on a Beckham or a Zlatan or a Messi to pop in for a couple of years and really develop the teams and add value to the teams. I know the valuations of these, are huge as it is, but surely that was the plan in the first place, that it doesn't just become kind of a billboard for an individual and it's far more about growing the business as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you bring it up because I'm writing a book about just that subject, which is, the Messi effect, and how do you leverage that as Major League Soccer and American soccer? How do you find that balance between making Messi the face of your league and the face of the growth of soccer, but knowing that he's 36 years old and his contract runs through the end of 2025? Maybe he plays that 2026 year, maybe not, but you have a very short timeline where he is going to be on the field. And when he leaves, how do you take full advantage of that moment, of this moment now where he's on the field? How do you pull in as many eyeballs as you can to watch Messi, but the bigger challenge is keeping them when he's gone? And that is the task that MLS faces now. And it's really twofold. You have to change the narrative around MLS, both domestically and internationally, and say this is a league that has grown a lot. The quality is much better. And the best way to do that is to actually grow the quality of the game, of the teams, and that's in a way that's not going to resonate with American sports fans who aren't already tuning in. So you buy better players who aren't necessarily known to the general public in America, but increase the quality on the field. But then you do have to do something that says, okay, MLS is relevant, MLS matters, and that's where that star factor has always come in. It's this balance of, you need the Zlatans, but you also need the Miguel Almirons that you sign out of Argentina that nobody knows, who becomes a star in MLS and then is sold on to the Premier League. And you need both of those things to happen together in a way that flips the narrative here in America and pulls more of the mainstream media who pay less attention to soccer to say, okay, this is a league we need to discuss more, and we need to, and the casual sports fans say, oh, this isn't an amateur league. This is a real professional league. And Messi provides a chance to accelerate that going into the World Cup, right? You can use his celebrity to pull in more fans, and then the task is the other teams are strong enough to kind of earn respect from the fans that start to watch. And people say, okay, the quality of this league isn't as bad as I thought. I'm going to stick around. And then when Messi leaves, you got to give him a reason to stick around. And so it is a very difficult task. It is a really tough balance that MLS is going to face, and certainly that Inter Miami is going to face, because as we noted before, you can't just sign another Messi when he's gone. Mm-hmm. Even if you go and you sign Griezmann, it's not the same thing as signing Messi. So you have to build an infrastructure. You have to build a fan base that is about Inter Miami, because when Messi's gone, it's going to be a while probably before an MLS team is going to be able to sign Mbappe. And that's probably the next big personality that could have the same type of impact.
And a window into that value is that game in Hong Kong. The organizers put in a clause that if the four players, so the four marquee players that they judge to be marquee, so you've got Lionel Messi, Jordi Alba, Luis Suarez, and Sergio Busquets, if they were fit, the contractual clause said they had to play at least 45 minutes. And you would imagine that the consequence of that not happening, because Busquets and Alba came on after an hour as well, which probably again just sort of added to the feeling that the game maybe wasn't treated as seriously as it might have been, is probably that there is going to be some sort of financial settlement needed. So all of this, the financial potential of Inter Miami at the moment does depend on sort of a very, very small amount of aging individuals. And that's the business model they've chosen. It might well work. It's just a very different world to the one that we're, I suppose, more used to talking to in the English Premier League, where it is all about teams, right? We don't actually really have, Haaland aside, maybe, we don't really have superstars, right? Actually, the English Premier League, it's always been Real Madrid and Barcelona that would get the superstars often, and then actually it was the teams that would really grow a league more than actually the stars. The Premier League doesn't have Jude Bellingham at the moment, but it doesn't really matter because the brand of the clubs is so strong.
Yeah, Paul, and Adam makes a really good point there in terms of leagues and the MLS, and you're talking about the PR of the MLS and certain players not transcending that. Is a likely comparison to the Saudi Pro League, and you look at that game between Al Nassr without a Cristiano Ronaldo, and Inter Miami were beaten badly. What does that say about where the MLS is compared to a league that's trying to prove that it's better than the MLS and it's more sustainable than the MLS in a long term?
Yeah, it's tough because it's a preseason game where Inter Miami's 3 weeks into preseason against the team in the middle of their season in full form. But it doesn't matter to the people on the outside that are watching that game, right? This is a rare opportunity to measure one league against another league.
Mhm.
And the reality is MLS has a long way to go and to grow. Their rules are designed for these teams to be top heavy. You have your best players making a lot of money at the very top of the roster. And, most teams have kind of 3 to 7 players that are making a good amount of money. And then the depth behind that is not as strong as leagues around the world. And there's been a real push within the league to change the rules, to open things up, to allow that depth to build so that you can be more competitive globally. And MLS, their emphasis has always been on domestic competition. If we make our league as balanced as possible, we'll keep our fans happy in every market and we'll keep the stadiums full. And the stadiums have been full. But there is going to be a point where MLS hits its ceiling in terms of how much it can charge fans, how much revenue it can get from tickets. And they have to balance that out with television money, which is what makes the Premier League go and what makes Champions League go and all of these other leagues. Well, in order to increase your television audience, you need to convince the American public that it's a league worth watching because they can wake up on a Saturday morning and watch any Premier League game that they want, any Bundesliga game that they want. You can even here we can even get La Liga, the championship, you name it. I can watch it in the morning. So MLS doesn't have domestic competition for top level football, but it does on television. And that is that next layer of this argument of how do we grow Major League Soccer that the owners are asking. What do we do to be able to better compete with the world? And you're going to have this critical moment in 2025 of the Club World Cup here on US soil where MLS teams are going to face off against the best clubs in the world. And
Mm.
it's another opportunity to put on a good show for American fans to say, hey, these MLS teams are not as bad as we might think. They can, even if they lose to Manchester United or Manchester City 3-1, but they've played decent football. That makes a convincing argument to a fan. Okay, maybe I'll go out and watch Seattle play or another team play.
Yeah.
But if they go out and they get smashed 6-0, well, that's the opposite. It pulls MLS backwards. And so that's really this critical moment now in American soccer of you have Messi, you have this Club World Cup, you have the World Cup coming in 2026, and the popularity of the sport we know will grow out of that summer. How do you take advantage of that? And how do you change the league rules to best leverage that moment? And that debate is happening in real time right now amongst the MLS owners on the board of what do we do to best capitalize? And I don't know that there's a clear answer. I don't, in MLS's mind, they are looking at this. A lot of these owners have been arguing that this is the long game because unlike European leagues, this league was founded in 1996. It is not that old. Miami is like a 5-year-old team. Even some of the better teams, LAFC, was founded in 2017. So there's not history. There's no, my father was from Costa Rica. I grew up a fan of Alajuelense because that's what my father was a fan of and his father was a fan of. That hasn't happened really in America yet. I'm just teaching my 4-year-old and 2-year-old my teams. So the generational fandom, we need to wait another 20 years to really see the impact of that. And then there's this other sector of owners who are saying, well, we don't really need to wait 20 years. We can pull in new fans in other ways. And that's kind of, I think, the base of the argument here of do we continue slow growth and base it on kind of the generational impact of sports, or do we accelerate it because we have a league filled with billionaire owners, probably the richest group of owners outside of the Premier League, and it's right up there with them. A lot of the owners are the same. And say, okay, let's use a little bit more of this money, maybe take on some more losses on the short end, betting that will increase the audience and thus increase the revenue. And there's a real battle right now.
I think that you're talking about, some of the potential rewards of kind of the longer term. I suppose the risks in the shorter term, particularly when you talk about these key moments where you've got Club World Cup and also 26, but you also have kind of a rival baby league sprouting up in terms of, what's going on in Saudi Arabia that's also keen to be that kind of next market outside of Europe that really takes shape. And you also have I think what is probably going to be a land grab in the States by European teams over the next 10 to 15 years as well. So really interesting thing happening this summer where you have basically most of the Premier League is going to end up playing pre-season friendlies this year in the United States. Now, that's mostly because they're looking 2 years out. They're almost working back from the World Cup. So World Cup 26 year, they're thinking the market's quite saturated for soccer that year. So, and also 2025, you've got the Club World Cup. So that's going to be saturated as well. So therefore, everyone's going this summer to the US because they want to get the appearance fees that they get from these friendlies, which are really, really big. And they also want the sponsorship and they want all those different engagements with fans. And they're seeing this growing market and TV deals, all that sort of stuff. But what they're doing this summer, which is interesting, last summer, Man United and Arsenal played each other at the MetLife and it sold out, right? And that's New Jersey, the stadium that's going to play the World Cup final in 26. This coming summer, Man United, Arsenal, Liverpool are all playing each other again in the States. They're not going, there might be the odd game against, maybe a US team or a traveling European team as well. But you've also got Chelsea playing Man City in the US. And I do wonder, some people say this is conspiratorial. I wonder whether some of these European clubs, because you've also got, I think Madrid, Juventus, and another team are going out there to play each other as a group like they did last year as well. Whether they're all starting to build like a body of evidence that shows we can sell out stadiums by giving people the proper stuff, right? They get the MLS, but they're waking up at 8 in the morning to watch games in the Premier League as it is. Why don't we give them some of this competitively? What could we make doing that? And that's why I think a Champions League final, for example, there's loads of owners of European clubs that would love to play a Champions League final in New York, right? Or Miami. They see that as like a no-brainer, right? Why is that so different to playing in previously, obviously before wars, Moscow or Baku, or in terms of flight time and things like that? It's not so dramatic. And I think that's something that's going on. You have this really interesting court case at the moment where you've got US soccer and a promoter called Relevant and FIFA that are all kind of shaking up whether it is actually possible to restrict teams from playing games outside their country, and how possible that's going to be in the long term and how sustainable that position is. And the interesting thing is, I think, Premier League clubs would never admit to this, right? They would never say we want to take big Premier League games outside of the UK. And I don't think they do at the moment, to be honest. I think they'd probably be well after kind of La Liga and the French league in terms of doing that. But if everyone else starts to do it, you can bet that there'll be a point where they start to think about it properly as well. And actually the resistance has come from other US sports who are kind of saying, well, that could grab a share of sponsorship and marketing and TV deals and all of that kind of thing. I mean, US sports are a fascinating thing because for an economy that's so open in many ways in the States in general, US sports are very kind of protectionist, actually. When just what Paul was saying about sort of all the different rules around MLS in terms of wage caps and all of this kind of stuff, and also market share. And I think also, US soccer would want something out of it, right? Like if you're going to be making money playing in our country, what are we getting out of it? Do you give, I don't know, a percentage of money that you're making from this towards development of grassroots football in the States or something like that? So I think some of these conversations are going to happen more and more. And I think that's why there is a more urgent need for MLS to move faster than thinking we can wait for that kind of our grandparents' children in sort of 25, 30 years. Well, it's going to be a lot longer unless people are having past to kind of sort it all out for us. And I think that's why some of those owners are looking at it and thinking we need to get moving on this.
Yeah, I mean, Adam, I think you need to come co-write the book with me because you've done a chapter here that I'm writing on, which is exactly right. That relevant lawsuit is so critical because it does introduce the idea of competitive football being played here in the US and being competition to MLS. And you're right. And when we talk about other leagues being worried about
sorry, just to explain this goes back to when I think there was a La Liga game, a Spanish La Liga game that they wanted to play. I think it was in Miami a few years ago, and in the end it didn't happen. And I think Relevant were the promoters that wanted to take it over. and FIFA and US soccer ended up sort of being an obstacle to that at the time.
Right. And then La Liga didn't want it to happen at first because of the backlash in
Yeah.
Spain. And so then Relevant used a game between two Ecuadorian teams to essentially set the stage for this lawsuit that they were going to host an Ecuadorian league game in Miami. But it does bring competition. And some of those owners of other leagues, by the way, are MLS owners, right? So they have stakes in multiple leagues. You've got the Hunt family who just won a Super Bowl. They own FC Dallas. They're one of the most prominent and important voices on the MLS Board of Governors. The Kraft family of the Patriots own the Revolution, David Tepper, the Panthers, and Charlotte FC. You can keep going down the list. But I agree with you, and I think there are people making that argument saying, let's not be naive to the idea that we are not the only ones that recognize how robust this market is. And as a side note to that, and maybe an aside that MLS needs to wake up to, is this American market has shown that they have this massive appetite for the best soccer, the best football in the world. They watch the World Cup. They watch the U.S. men's national team. They love the Premier League. They will tune into Champions League. They will latch onto the U.S. women's national team. It's really MLS that's not taking full advantage of just how robust that market is. And by the way, they're also tuning in for games with Messi in them to a different degree than they're tuning into the rest of the MLS games. So, if you sit still, or even if you grow just a little bit, it's the same thing as sitting still or moving backwards if other people are growing more than you. And I think that is the risk of the Premier League coming, La Liga coming and playing games, Bundesliga, Champions League, Liga MX. If that Relevant lawsuit happens and they win, now you've got Club America against Chivas that you've got to worry about that will sell out stadiums. And thus the kind of creation of this Leagues Cup to try to capitalize on the popularity of the Mexican League here in the US as well. So all of these dynamics are spinning around in this moment in time when the eyes of the world, of the footballing world, are coming to the US for 3 and potentially 4 summers in a row with Copa America, Club World Cup, potentially Women's World Cup in 27, and then even the Olympics the following year in LA, that you have this opportunity. What are you going to do with it? There's not a clear answer yet. And, I think that's a scary thing, but in a way, it also gets me excited because we know that this is an unprecedented opportunity. The sport in this country is going to change whether MLS does or not. And the access to the game is going to change, I believe, whether MLS changes dramatically or not. But certainly, I think when we talk about the growth of domestic football in the United States, of soccer, of Major League Soccer, the decisions that are made this year and next year ahead of that World Cup are going to be absolutely critical to the short-term and long-term future of the league. And, the fact that there's not a clear path, I think is just so intriguing.
Well, just before we finish, and I want to finish on that actually, is the short and long term future of this league. And in the Premier League, we're talking about profitability and sustainability at this moment in time, right? Messi, Jordi Alba, Suarez, Busquets, they're not on chicken change, man. Like, they're on big money. How are they managing to leverage this? Is this a Chelsea thing? Have these billionaires found a way of giving these guys particular kind of contracts? How does it work in terms of the sustainability and the wage caps that the MLS actually has?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the whole design of MLS, is to keep these owners from spending beyond their means, to keep this sustainable, to keep the losses low. That's the idea, really. And those losses are staying low while the valuations of the clubs are going up. And Messi has been a great success for Miami because they were really smart in how they structured this deal. He's making $20 to $25 million a year in salary. That's not that bad, considering especially Messi's history and the salary that he's made. They gave him a percentage of the team that he'll own when he stops playing, which obviously has a huge value to it. I mean, this is a team that's going to be valued $1 billion or more and is building a new stadium that they'll open in 2025. That's going to only increase the valuation of the club. But, that is the argument that MLS is saying, is we have owners who are some of the richest people in the world. David Tepper is one of the richest individuals in the world, and he's not spending that much money in Major League Soccer right now. And that's by design. That's not a mistake. And so, and there are a lot of teams that are looking at Miami saying, we would never build our teams that way. LAFC is saying we would never sign that many older stars as our top players. Like, we'll take a Chiellini and a Bale on $1 million, on a club friendly contract, but we're not going to sign 35 and 36 and 37-year-olds. In fact, I think just 5 people over the age of 33 were signed in this January window by MLS teams. It's not the design of the league. But for Miami, it is both a commercial opportunity that's been successful. This Asia tour made money for them. The commercial opportunities, the new Royal Caribbean jersey sponsors, all of those prices go to Messi prices while he's here. The question is, again, what happens when he leaves? What happens to those prices? What happens to the brand? And how do you think about spending and building after that? I think that when I talk to people for this book, when I'm talking to people involved in these board discussions, or, certainly that have been around discussions around the growth of the league, there is a question of how much are they willing to take on losses? Like how much money are you willing to lose to grow the league? And where do you see the line of this amount more is not really going to grow the sport? It's not worth it to spend an extra 20 or 30 million if the audience doesn't really go up. And I think that's where MLS, the expansion of MLS, has impacted the discussion more than anything, because over the last 8 years, since I first started covering the league again full time in 2015 with Orlando City, there were 19 teams in the league that year. That Orlando City was the 19th team coming into the league. There are going to be 30 teams next year. And those owners are buying in at expansion prices of San Diego $500 million expansion fee. That's you could buy 2 Premier League teams with that money, which is what some people should do. And actually, Bill Foley said, I'm out on Vegas for MLS. I'll buy Bournemouth instead. A team that's going to make me more money, or theoretically could make me more money, I should say. There's not a lot of money to be made in football, it turns out.
At all.
But a lot of these owners, when you come in and you put 500 million down before you've kicked a ball, you're saying, whoa, my investment horizons are much different than the owners who started in 1996. What's my pathway to making my money back? And that's where that conversation now, that debate starts to shift, where some of these owners are saying, if we need to spend more to make more, well, I've already put 500 million into the pot. So let's the rest of us do something similar. And I think, whoever wins that debate, whichever side wins that debate of kind of where those investment levels go, I think will dictate what the short and long term of MLS looks like. Because, it could be that we wait for the next generational fan, and then you find out, oh, this was the wrong decision when relevant happens and the Premier League takes over the US. Or they could say, okay, let's really use 2026 as a springboard and increase our spending and go buy a bunch of star players and try to do what Saudi has done and sign players who are 27, 28 and bring them over to America, and see and make a bet that spending will be worth it. It's easy for me to say because it's not my tens of millions of dollars. We've seen how much Saudi spent. I mean, I think it was close to $1 billion in that summer window, right? Something like that. That's not nothing. And how much will they see of that coming back? They're willing to take those losses. We've seen it with Live Golf and now with the Saudi Pro League. I don't know that MLS or many people have the appetite to make that bet and not know if they're going to see any of it back. And I think that's kind of the debate. Where is the line of it's worth it to we're losing millions of dollars for no reason?
Adam, does that, in your eyes, show, I guess, a sense of the limitation of the MLS compared to the Saudi Pro League, for instance? I mean, yeah, it's a lot of money, but even I think about America having family that live there. It's a country built on capitalistic notions, right? Like, and the idea of losses isn't acceptable in a certain way. When you've got Saudi as well, can take the losses, but I mean, where's that money? Some might say is backed by a state.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about loss leading ventures, right? Like sometimes that's how businesses work, and that can be, not necessarily a negative thing. But most of these people aren't in, most of the sports team owned in the States, there is a little bit of it kind of being a club, wanting to be part of that club, of being that, having that power and that status, that influence that comes with it. But I think they kind of get that by acquiring it. They don't really need to do it, because there isn't kind of a promotion relegation. So there isn't that kind of, in the Premier League, so much money is spent because you're constantly chasing something. You're either chasing Champions League qualification, or you're chasing to stay in the league because you're competing against, clubs that are spending loads and loads of money. Whereas clearly, like the MLS, the MLS challenge is slightly different to that. And then, so the MLS kind of exists for different reasons to the Saudi Pro League, right? The Saudi Pro League is, we can talk about this forever, right? And we're not going to do that now. But like the Saudi Pro League is essentially a sovereign wealth fund project at this point that is, aiming to, I suppose, culturally alter perceptions of Saudi Arabia, and we can go through all the kind of discussions that we've had previously around the kind of the pros and the cons of that, whether society is changing, all that kind of stuff. But I think the only way in which I would really compare Saudi and MLS is that they are both leagues outside of Europe that have the potential in some way to become kind of a significant market. And, for example, if you were, I don't know, in 10 years' time, devising, expanding the European Champions League and thinking we need a team from here, a team from there, a team from there, you're probably thinking straight away, I need a team from MLS, I need a team from Saudi, maybe a team from Brazil, Mexican League. So they're one of those with the potential to be a big market from a kind of a broadcast point of view. Because of all the brands and the money and the status that's associated with it.
All right, let's end it there. Gents, thanks so much for your time. Adam, Paul, I know it's early up there. Paul, thanks for joining us from the US. And please don't forget to rate and review the podcast. And we'll be back for another episode of the Athletic Football Podcast tomorrow. Thanks for listening. If you like this video, click subscribe for more content like this. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season to bring you the inside track to the biggest stories in football. If you'd like to listen to the full episodes for free, search the Athletic Football Podcast wherever you get your podcasts from.